When we think of Rome and Greece, we often imagine them as opposites. One, powerful and militaristic. The other, the cradle of philosophy and art. But the reality is far more complex. Before Rome set its sandals on Greek soil as a conqueror, there was a period of alliances, agreements, and many tensions simmering beneath the surface. At the beginning of the 3rd century BC, Rome was not yet the all-powerful empire that would one day dominate the known world. Instead, it was an aggressive republic in the midst of expanding across Italy. Greece, on the other hand, was no longer the glorious power of Pericles or Alexander the Great's time. It was fragmented into multiple states and kingdoms competing with one another. Macedonia in the north, the Aetolian League, the Achaean League, Sparta, each with its own agenda. Rome and Greece didn't start out as enemies. In fact, Rome had a deep admiration for Greek culture. The Romans copied Greek architecture, adopted their god with new names, and sent their noble sons to study under Hellenic philosophers. Greek influence was so strong that many Roman senators spoke Greek better than Latin. But in politics, admiration doesn't always mean friendship. As Rome gained power in Italy, it began to clash with the interests of the Hellenistic kingdoms, especially Macedonia. This kingdom, heir to Alexander the Great's empire, had managed to control much of Greece and continued to exert influence over the city-states, sometimes in an authoritarian way. Many Greeks saw this as tyranny, others as a necessity. At first, Rome didn't interfere much in Greek affairs. It was more concerned with Carthage, its great rival in the West. But that changed when Rome's commercial, political, and strategic interests began to feel threatened by the constant wars among the Greeks, and especially by the actions of King Philip V of Macedonia. Philip wasn't just any king. He was ambitious, clever, and he saw Rome as a potential obstacle. Years earlier, he had even tried to ally with Hannibal. Yes, the very same Hannibal with the elephants, during the Second Punic War. That attempt left a deep mark on Roman memory. So, although Rome and Greece shared temples, gods, and mutual admiration, the political landscape was a ticking time bomb. The divided and conflicted Greek cities began to see Rome not only as a neutral arbiter, but as a potential ally. Some even invited Rome to intervene to stop their rivals. And Rome, never one to miss a good excuse to expand its power, accepted. Thus began the story of how two worlds that seemed to respect, even admire, each other ended up at odds. An uncomfortable alliance, full of hidden interests and empty promises, was a first step toward inevitable conflict. What followed wasn't just a war. It was a game of political chess, filled with betrayals, memorable speeches, and an unprecedented cultural plundering. Because when Rome attacked Greece, it did so with more than swords. It did so wearing the mask of the liberator. In every great war, there's a spark. And in the case of the conflict between Rome and Greece, that spark had a name: Philip V of Macedonia. Philip was no ordinary king. He was young, ambitious, and heir to a powerful lineage, the Macedonian kings who had forged an empire under the leadership of Alexander the Great. But those days of glory were long gone. By the 2nd century BC, Macedonia was a shadow of its former self, though still a very dangerous shadow. Philip wanted to restore Macedonia's lost power, and to do that, he needed to control his neighbors, Greece, Thrace, Asia Minor. His ambitions quickly clashed with the interests of other regional powers like Rhodes, Pergamon, and Athens, who saw Macedonia as a growing threat. But what truly alarmed Rome wasn't that Philip was fighting his neighbors. It was who he was aligning with. During the Second Punic War, while Rome was fighting for its survival against Hannibal and the Carthaginians, Philip made a catastrophic diplomatic mistake. He signed a secret treaty with Carthage. The message was clear: If Carthage wins, I take the eastern Mediterranean. Though the alliance never materialized into real military action, Rome didn't forget. And when peace with Carthage was finally achieved, Roman senators began to look east with a thirst for revenge. The opportunity came in 200 BC when Greek cities began to call for help. Pergamon and Rhodes, both naval powers in the Aegean, were desperate to stop Philip's expansion, and Athens, after being directly attacked by the Macedonians, also joined the plea. At first, Rome hesitated. Was it really worth getting involved in problems across the sea? But in the end, a combination of political pressure, strategic interest, and old grudges tipped the balance. And so began the Second Macedonian War. Officially, Rome didn't come as a conqueror. No. Rome came as a liberator. Or at least, that's what they said. In 197 BC, Rome and its allies defeated Philip V at the Battle of Cynoscephaly, a key clash between the Macedonian phalanx and the more flexible Roman legions. The result was crushing. Rome smashed the Macedonian army. Here's the interesting part. Rome didn't annex Macedonia. Instead, it allowed Philip to keep ruling, but under strict conditions. He had to pay tribute, give up hostages, and most importantly, renounce all influence over the Greek city-states. A diplomatic and military victory, but also the beginning of a very Roman strategy, not to conquer immediately, but to dominate gradually by weakening and controlling. Philip was defeated, but he wouldn't be the last Macedonian to dream of greatness. Rome, for its part, had just stepped into a new arena, the complex and fascinating world of Greek politics. And the best, or the worst, was yet to come. Rome never presented itself as an invading power. That didn't sound good in speeches. Rome's approach was more refined. It claimed to come to liberate, to protect, to restore balance. Greece would be no exception. After defeating Philip V at the Battle of Cynoscephaly, Rome had full control of the situation. But instead of keeping Macedonia or imposing direct rule, it made a decision that surprised many. It withdrew, or at least it appeared to. That's when one of the most curious and strategic figures in this entire story appeared. Titus Quinctius Flamininus, a Roman general who, unlike many of his peers, spoke Greek fluently, appreciated Hellenic culture, and knew how to win over the city-states with words, not swords. Flamininus understood that, to conquer Greece, there was no need to station legions in every city. It was enough to plant an idea that Rome was not a threat, but an ally, and to do that, he staged a political event that would go down in history. In 196 BC, during the Isthmian Games, a highly prestigious sporting event in the Greek world, Flamininus stood before thousands of spectators and gave a speech that still echoes in ancient texts. He solemnly declared that all Greek cities would be free, autonomous, without garrisons or tribute. Greece is free, he said, and the stadium erupted in applause and tears. The trick was in the details. Rome promised freedom, yes, but freedom under supervision, because although Philip had retreated, Rome's presence remained strong, and that apparent generosity came with strings attached. Rome's enemies were now Greece's enemies. Diplomatic decisions passed through the Senate, and if a city rebelled, the response was swift and brutal. Still, many Greeks believed the promise. After years of internal wars and Macedonian domination, the idea of Rome restoring order was appealing. But there were also critical voices, especially among the wiser minds of the time. Some philosophers and politicians warned that this freedom was a trap, a new kind of yoke disguised as an alliance. Time would prove them right, because after every Roman intervention, the city-states were left weaker, more divided, more dependent. Rome didn't impose chains. It imposed debts, obligations, promises. And so, Step by step, without the need for outright invasion, Greece fell under Roman control, not through open conquest, but through a more subtle and effective strategy, making the Greeks themselves accept, even applaud, Rome's presence in their land. A conquest without blood, or at least not much, of freedom that, little by little, revealed its true face. Rome spoke of freedom, of alliances, of protection. But as often happens in history, what's said publicly doesn't always match what's sought privately. Behind the facade of liberation, Rome had much more concrete interests in Greece, wealth, prestige, and cultural power. To begin with, Greece was a true treasure, not just in symbolic or philosophical terms, but literally. Greek temples were filled with golden statues, votive jewels, and objects of immeasurable value accumulated over centuries. The cities had long been centers of trade, art, and religion, and although many were in decline, their wealth was still considerable. Rome, coming off costly wars against Carthage and other powers, saw in Greece an almost ideal source of income. But it wasn't just about looting. The Romans knew how to make it look fair. After each war, they demanded indemnities, fines, tribute, or simply war reparations. And if a city refused to pay or cooperate, well, that's when the legions showed up. What wasn't handed overwillingly was taken by force. But there was something even more coveted than gold: Greek art. To the Romans, Greek culture was the epitome of sophistication. Their sculptors were the finest, their temples magnificent, their philosophers admirable. That's why, every time a Greek city was occupied or sacked, Roman generals took more than military spoils. They took the soul of Greece. Sculptures, columns, scrolls, instruments, ceremonial jewels, all were packed up and sent to Rome, not just as trophies, but as a way to decorate Roman prestige. Temples in Rome began filling with Greek art. The villas of senators looked like miniature Hellenistic museums. Even the gods changed languages. Jupiter, Venus, and Mars began to suspiciously resemble Zeus, Aphrodite, and Ares. Because Rome didn't just want to dominate Greece militarily. It wanted to absorb it, to adorn itself with its past glory, to appropriate its heritage. This cultural plunder wasn't improvised. Many Roman generals brought along art experts, scribes, and even captured Greek philosophers, whom they treated as living trophies. In the Roman victory parades, it wasn't just prisoners and weapons on display, but also statues, manuscripts, and defeated scholars. And as this happened, Rome began to change. Greece became part of Rome's soul. Its gods, its thought, its aesthetics all began to merge. Ironically, the conquest became mutual, because although Greece fell under Roman power, Greece began to conquer Rome from within. But the price of that fusion was high. The Greek cities lost their autonomy. Their treasures vanished. Their people were enslaved or re-educated according to Roman values. The cradle of democracy, philosophy, and tragedy had become a stage for the power plays of a foreign republic. And the worst was still to come. Every conquest story has a decisive moment, a point of no return. For Greece, that moment came when the masks fell. Rome's promises were broken and the true occupation began. For years, the Greeks lived under an illusion that Rome was just passing through. That, yes, it was a foreign power, but a respectful one, that it would help maintain balance. But when the impositions grew stronger, when tributes increased, internal decisions were made in Rome, and cities lost their right to self-govern. Something shattered. And across Greece, a question began to spread. What happened to our freedom? The answer was as clear as it was violent. In 171 BCE, the Third Macedonian War broke out, led by Perseus, the son of Philip V. It was a desperate attempt to recover lost dignity and power. But the result was disastrous. Rome responded with its full military might and, in 168 BCE at the Battle of Pydna, completely destroyed the Macedonian army. Perseus was captured, and Macedonia was divided and turned into client states under Roman control. From that moment, uprisings began to multiply. One of the most notable occurred in Corinth, a symbol of Greek resistance. The Achaean League, the last great federation of city-states, rose up against Rome in a final act of pride. Rome's response was brutal. In 146 BCE, Roman legions marched into Corinth, razed the city, killed all the men, enslaved the women and children, and reduced the temples to rubble. It was a clear, cold, and final message. The era of free Greece was over. That same year, Rome also destroyed Carthage. It was a double blow that made its total dominance of the Mediterranean clear. Greece was no longer an ally, nor a liberated region. Greece was now a Roman province. From then on, Greece's story was written in Latin. Its philosophers taught in Rome. Its statues adorned Roman villas. Its cities obeyed Roman governors. The cradle of Western civilization, the land of Plato, Socrates, and Pericles, had been absorbed. But even in conquest, Greece did not vanish. Its culture, art, and thought survived within the conqueror. Rome subdued Greece with the sword, yes, but it was Greece that ended up shaping the soul of Rome. And that is one of history's great twists. That sometimes those who lose the war win the future.